Welcome to the Victims and Villains podcast.
This is the show where we talk nerd, talk hope, and speak nothing else.
I'm your co-host, Captain Nostalgia.
I'm your co-host, Joshua-Howell.
And this is episode 335, where we are going to be talking about The Mandalorian Season 1.
I have never met a Mandalorian. I've only read the stories.
Your name will be legendary.
The Mandalorian, original series streaming November 12th on Disney+.
And we're going to throw this right up front for you guys. Mandalorian Season 1 in full is currently streaming right now on Disney+. And we are just going to throw this out there. This is our spoiler warning because I feel like you can't really talk about the majority of this series without getting into spoilers. So you have officially been warned because this is the way.
This is the way.
Debated on that, or I have spoken. My wife watched this with me for the first time this past weekend, going through again, and man, I forgot how much I loved this show. Everything from the performances in it to the overall story arc to, of course, the soft spot that the child, aka Baby Yoda, has created in all of our hearts.
Yeah, they hit it out of the park with this show. I mean, I can't believe that Disney Plus has only been here for a year. You know, they launched Disney Plus last fall with this first episode, and they killed it, man. They killed it. They really did. I'm very impressed. They've had a lot of faults, Disney Plus, in their first year, and a lot of hiccups with COVID and everything. But man, this was a good call to launch with this series.
And not even just the launch of this series, but just really being bold, because I believe like the head of Disney has kind of talked about that within the first year that they were prepared to lose upwards of like $5 million to $1 billion just to ensure the success of this service. And then COVID hit, and now they've really kind of taken a big hit, obviously pulling all of their movies out of theaters. But with The Mandalorian, I feel like they just came out of the gate swinging, especially the opening, like just cold open to the introduction of this. I can either bring you in warm or I can bring you in cold. Mm-hmm. It's got to be one of the best openings to any show, and just really setting the stage for what this series was going to bring in the coming 8 episodes.
Absolutely. And it rang true with so many people that even after a year like we've had, where every other show pretty much that they teased this time last year, like this is what you're going to get, all these Marvel shows, we are getting a second season of The Mandalorian before we get our first Marvel show. And most people are just fine with that because The Mandalorian was so good. So, props to the people that were behind this because, it's a good show.
Favreau absolutely nails this out of the park. And one of my biggest complaints that I've always had about Star Wars as a franchise, at least for me personally, has been the fact that this, in every version that we've gotten on the big screen live action, it has always started out with in a galaxy far, far away. And yet the galaxy has always felt so small because we've always been focusing exclusively on the Skywalkers. And I know there are people out there that are like, well, Clone Wars is still wrapped up into that saga. I know that there have been books, and I know that there have been comics. Josh right now has a backdrop of just a ton of Star Wars books. Mm-hmm. But I've never been really that big into the franchise to kind of, seek out books or comics. Like I've read my fair share of the comics from Dark Horse and Marvel, respectively. But this was the first time that I felt like this universe kind of expanded itself, and I feel like Favreau brought one of the most like obscure pieces in the franchise and kind of really brought a lot of depth and fleshed it out, because to me, before the Mandalorian, like, you really didn't know a whole lot about Boba Fett and kind of where he came from in the guild, at least to the capacity of a live action show or film.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, ever since the Christmas special, we've been trained to think that there is more to this Boba Fett character, and we've wanted more. But then Return of the Jedi came, and Boba Fett was gone. So we were like, well, what now? We have had, like you said, some non-live action Mandalorian content with the Clone Wars and Rebels. We've definitely seen some Mandalorian stuff from there, but we haven't seen much live action. And so instead of giving us a Boba Fett movie, we got an 8-episode, very well done, very well created show that gave a little more. And it's not the history of it; it's where they are, after the original trilogy. And so, yeah, I really liked where this starts. I like that it's not the history of, and it felt really lived in. And it felt like something that I've been waiting for ever since I first saw Boba Fett and wanted to know more about The Mandalorian.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Right, because this is set 5 years after the events of Return of the Jedi, and the Empire has fallen. That is such a big drop throughout the course of this entire show. And before we get into this show, though, you brought up something that I'm very curious to see and hear your opinions on. Before this was even an idea, when Disney acquired Star Wars and Lucasfilm, they had all these plans to kind of do a Han Solo movie, a Boba Fett movie, and like they had like all of these. Rogue One obviously was the one that they had got made, but Boba Fett was the one that had kind of gotten away from us, and a large portion of that was because of the fallout of Josh Trank and Fan Forstick. Josh Trank was the one that was attached to direct and I believe maybe even write or co-write the script for what would have been a Boba Fett movie. Had that manifested, do you feel like, how do you feel about Josh Trank kind of entering into the world of Star Wars to do a movie like that?
I mean, it's the old tale story of an indie director that comes on the scene with a smash hit like Chronicle, and then they're thrown in to the big boys table with a huge movie. They're told, hey, you're going to get all the leeway you want. We want it to be like your indie film. We want you to put your sticker on it. And then the more that person tries to put their sticker on it, the more the studio comes in and says, actually, we want this, 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 and this. And then by the end of it, it is nothing like what they discussed before they started shooting. And then you have the whole drama of, it's not my movie, it's their movie, and the fallout afterwards. I mean, it wasn't just Josh Trank. It was also the issue with, the folks that they hired to do the Han Solo movie. There was just a lot of issues with Lucas films and the people that are running it, and just a lot of, they had big plans. I felt like, that when they announced all the anthology movies, all the Star Wars story movies that they were going to do, at one point it reminded me of Sony when they were announcing all the Spider-Man movies they were going to do with the Aunt May movie and the Sinister movies. And I was like, guys, I know it's Star Wars and I know you're Disney and you can pull off a lot, but maybe slow it down. And it took them a long time to realize that, we are going too fast. And now things are definitely slowing down. And now things like COVID are forcing them to slow down even more. And I think that's a great call. But, I think we live in a day and age where TV is not second rate. In fact, TV and streaming presents far better experiences than most of the movies you'll find out there. And if I had to pick, no shame to Josh Trank at all, because it really has nothing to do with him. If I had to pick between a Boba Fett movie and an 8-episode Mandalorian series, hands down Mandalorian series, because I can't imagine them capturing in an hour and a half, 2-hour movie what they captured in an 8-hour event like this. And so I think this was the right call. And I think slowing down with Star Wars and giving it some time to breathe is the right call going forward.
It almost feels like the studio had kind of learned their lesson after Solo, because
I hope.
I feel like Rogue One was kind of the first anthology film that they had done, and it was received mixed at best, to where I feel like you had fans, like diehard fans of the originals, that were like, this isn't my Star Wars, and then you had the mixed reception, mostly to poor reception, depending on who you ask about Last Jedi, and then you had the whole Solo director debacle, and so you throw all of that in with Josh Trank and the fallout of Fan Four Stick, and you had just have a nightmare. And I think with Disney Plus that they really started to kind of back off and really kind of let the director have their vision, because to my understanding from what I read is that Favreau basically went to Lucasfilm and said, hey, I have this idea for a series. And when you watch the credits for this, Favreau really had a heavy hand in making this, whether it's to a writing degree, producing degree, or even a directing degree credit. And I feel like he just opens up this world similarly to the way that he opened up the MCU with Iron Man, and just really brings a lot of unexpected humor, a lot of unexpected heart, and just by far some of the best action sequences we have seen thus far in any Star Wars medium.
Yeah, well, Favreau was definitely the man to do this. He really ensured the quality of this show and the attention that the show needed. I mean, I could talk all day about the issues I think a lot of people have with Kathleen Kennedy and her being brought on in the Feige type role for Star Wars. She is a great producer. If you look at her history, she has produced some amazing content. But taking a producer and putting her in the creative director role for Star Wars that someone like Kevin Feige has for Marvel, I think you're asking her to do an incredibly different job. And I think that's why we keep on hearing about these really great directors being brought on for a project and then that fizzling out because of creative differences. And, that's why I think something like the Clone Wars and Rebels did so well, because you had Dave Filoni working side by side with George Lucas, and Dave Filoni knew the story, he knew the background, he knew the saga of Star Wars, and he was able to write within that and really bring it out. And similarly, Favreau and Lucas coming together to make The Mandalorian, I think that was just, it was a good pairing, and Favreau really brought it home. So I'm very glad that Kennedy and her team allowed that to happen. And I think, I'm not sure if she's staying on. I've heard a lot of rumors of her leaving in the near future, but whoever replaces her, or if she stays on, I think if we had more things like this, where you bring on somebody like Jon Favreau and you trust them to make something that honors the property, I think that you've got a better chance of coming out with something that's amazing and beloved instead of almost universally hated.
Agreed. And I think for me on the second watch, I think last year when The Mandalorian hit in its first season, we were so enthralled with Baby Yoda. And that, the show itself, I feel like kind of got overlooked. But the backdrop to this show is some of the darkest, I think, that we've ever seen in Star Wars. There's a scene in particular where the first episode, you're kind of exploring the market and you have one creature in a cage and he's watching another one of his species being roasted alive. And like there's scenes where Carl Weathers' character is basically like turns to Mando and he's like, hey, like, I'll scrap you for parts or something along those lines. Like, I mean, and the entire series is wrapped around bounty hunters and ex-Empire people coming after a baby. Like, it is a dark show, but I think that they found a really great way to kind of balance a lot of that stuff with the humor that kind of like opens it up. And Jason Sudeikis, who plays one of the stormtroopers in episode 8, it opens up on this banter of two stormtroopers just going back and forth, and it is one of the funniest episodes or funniest scenes in the entire series. You have episode 4 is another great example where it's a lot more lighthearted, where Mando basically has to crash on this planet and he has to kind of get it fixed, and the mechanic is having to look after baby Yoda while Mando goes to look for money. And a lot of that stuff is just very slapsticky, but it somehow fits into the complexity that is The Mandalorian. And how did you kind of feel about the show's kind of tone with this coming right out of the gates, as well, with just some of the showing more of the seedier underbelly of the Star Wars empire?
I really liked it. I mean, 5 years before this, the Rebels won. They blew up the second Death Star. The Empire was defeated, and you're imagining that all the good guys and all their folks are just living peacefully and enjoying life. But then there's plenty of other people that they might not have been stormtroopers, or they might have been stormtroopers stationed somewhere else, or they just lived in that world. And now what are they going to do? Did the Rebels just run and arrest anybody and everybody that wasn't on their team? Probably not. So where are they at, and what kind of world are they living in the fallout of Return of the Jedi? And I really like this. I feel like a bounty hunter, a bounty hunter is kind of that middleman. He could be working for the bad guys. He could be working for the good guys. He just does the dirty work. And I got the sense from the trailers this was kind of a sci-fi western where you're following this guy and seeing all the seedy places he goes and the seedy people he works with, and I just thought it was great. I really liked the tone. it wasn't too much in your face who the bad guys were and who the good guys were. It was kind of a nice, healthy balance. And everybody just has something to them that you're like, yeah, they're not really a good guy, or they're not terribly a bad guy. It was just kind of that gray. It was the whole gray zone. It was the gray zone, the show of who was good and who was bad. And I thought that was great. And then just following this Mandalorian guy who's basically Judge Dredd in Star Wars, never takes off his helmet, and he's just got the same look, and he's confident, and he's on a mission, and he's determined, and you shouldn't get in his way. I really liked that tone, and I thought it really worked well for the show.
And kind of speaking about the tone in particular, in the very first episode, there's a scene where Mando is... So, for context, Mandalorians basically live underground, and they go up one at a time. It is basically their price to pay from the fallout of the Empire being imploded, or and one of the things that we see is that our Mandalorian that we're following is getting armor that's crafted, and he's kind of like, you're seeing a little bit of his origin story. And in episode 8, they are basically trapped by Moff Gideon, and when they're trapped, you kind of get the full story of how his planet had been overrun. Kind of has a very much a feel of kind of like something like Superman or Batman meets Gamora. In that, like, and this show feels like the closest to like a modern superhero that we've ever seen in the Star Wars universe. And I honestly, like, I don't know how I kind of feel about them giving him this like super story. I feel like it's kind of something that we've seen done so many times, and it kind of almost feels like it is almost shoehorned in to kind of make him a little bit more of a sympathetic character. And to me, I feel like I didn't really need to know that about this character. I feel like Favreau and company did a really good job at really expanding and fleshing out the Mandalorian Kree as a religion, as a brotherhood, as a community. I feel like they did a really good job at kind of fleshing that out, and you walk away with knowing a whole lot more about why Boba Fett is the way that he is, like their rules and their visions. But then you get this like weird, like tragic backstory from him, and just it feels like old news by the time that we get there.
Yeah, I agree. I think they should have done it. I didn't mind the backstory. I just think they should have done it earlier, because honestly, I was confused for most of the season about a lot of things Mandalorian, because I have not read, despite these books back here, I've read a lot of, original trilogy books, but I have not read a lot of other stuff in the Star Wars lore about the Mandalorian. So before this film, or before this show, the only Mandalorians I had seen were Boba Fett and the Mandalorians on Star Wars Rebels and on Clone Wars. And I don't know if you noticed, but on those shows, Mandalorians take their helmets off like every 5 seconds. Like they're always without their helmets, and whether they're talking to their friends or they're talking to some, Obi-Wan who answers the door to their apartment, or they're walking around, they're always without their helmets. And then I see this show, and these guys never take their helmets off, and they're like, "This is the way." And I'm like, since when? Since when is this the way? Because every other content I've seen is not. But when then you find out that, well, he's not actually a Mandalorian, he's just living the Mandalorian creed, and he was saved by a Mandalorian. This is his, and then to see, the tragic backstory doesn't leave that much of an impact, but it shows a child that was ripped away from his life and then committed himself to this, and it's the only thing he can hold on to. So that's why he's so enveloped in it. And that's why he doesn't take off his helmet, because it's the only thing he knows. It's the only thing that he can really cling on to, because everything else was taken from him. When I see that, I'm like, okay, that I get it now, but they could have done that in the first half of the season, so the whole season I wasn't like, why is this conflicting with every other Star Wars thing I've seen? But with that realization, it does make sense.
I think too, a lot of the other things that you were talking about, whether it would be Clone Wars or Rebels or maybe even some of the like books or stuff, is because a lot of that stuff exists before the Empire had basically like been just eliminated. And
Sure.
so perhaps like in the fallout of the Empire, their religion shifted from it's okay to take off your masks to our secrecy is our key, because there is a point where the wielder chick who's got like the gold helmet and like the ruffles and
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe her, like she's like the main like architect for Mandalorian armor. She talks about how their secrecy is their key to survival. And you can definitely tell that the fallout of the Empire has had a massive impact on the Mandalorians, because there's several times throughout the first season where when someone meets Mando, they're like, oh, I thought you guys were extinct, or like to see you in the flesh again, like it feels weird, and I thought you guys were myths or urban legends, and they're very much referred to several times throughout the course of this first season as a legend or a myth. And their secrecy, I feel like with the helmets, it kind of makes more sense in that regards. Now, I've never been through Clone Wars all the way through. I've never seen Rebels all the way through. So like my knowledge lives and dies with Boba Fett. That's it. So seeing this kind of as a novice Star Wars fan really fleshes out a lot more of one of the most beloved characters to me in this franchise.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I don't want to get nitpicky or anything, but this is one of the issues I have with modern Star Wars content, whether it was the sequel trilogy or whether it's this show or something else. But it seems like we keep on returning to the same planets that we've been to for all of these shows and for all of these movies. We get the same type of characters, but then the characters that we've known and we've established are myths to all these people. Like every content we've seen of Star Wars, we see Jedi, and they're all over the place, and they're responsible for bringing down the Empire. But then you see something like the trailer for season 2 of this show, or you see the sequels where they're like, the Jedi, I heard that was a myth, like it's like we're going back to the same planets, and yet no one's heard of the Jedi, or they didn't think they were real. Same with the Mandalorians. We've seen the Mandalorians and all these other content, and it's not like some distant planet. It's planets we've already been to, and it's not like it's decades or a century past since the last time we saw them. It's 5 years since the original trilogy. And yet, I thought Mandalorians were a myth. I didn't realize they still existed. It's like, sometimes they say things like that, and it throws me out because that's all I've seen on screen, and I don't really understand how people would not know about the Jedi or not know about Mandalorians. And I feel like maybe it's because they keep going back to the same planets, but they should do a better job on explaining why people don't know about this, because it seems like everybody else does, especially with the Jedi. They call them sorcerers in the second season trailer, which I liked. I did like that, but it was also like, in what land do you live in that the Skywalkers aren't a known name, and Jedi aren't a known thing? Because I just haven't seen enough. I haven't seen enough Star Wars content that throws them into obscurity, or that these people are so disconnected that they've never heard of Jedi before. Especially
with the fact that we have a few episodes that actually take place on Tatooine.
Right.
Like that to me is kind of one of the biggest blunders I feel like the series does, is to just ignore the Skywalker saga entirely. And it's like, well, you're mentioning the Empire, but yet you have to also acknowledge the Skywalkers, because had the Skywalkers are the reason that the Empires are no more.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it was when you go back and when you watch Return of the Jedi, it is like such a big deal that the Jedi are A, coming back, and B, that it's led by the young Master Skywalker. Like, huge deal for that film, and it's that huge deal is echoed throughout the trilogy, the latest trilogy that we got with Rey and Finn, and there's no mention of that here, and it feels almost out of place that there wouldn't be mention of the Skywalkers at all. Like, I get it. Like, that was one of my first complaints about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the way that it clung too closely to the MCU and didn't really carve out its own identity. This one feels the opposite, where it's trying to carve out its own identity, and it's very selective about what it acknowledges that has come, quote unquote, before it, being set 5 years after the events of Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, and I can hear people screaming the counter argument of, well, Josh, and I guess they could be talking to you or me, but well, Josh, this is a universe. The rebels were, there's people throughout the universe of Star Wars that weren't a part of those original movies, and they weren't a part of the rebels, and so they weren't touched by this, and so they wouldn't know names like Skywalker. And I agree, but I feel we rarely see that other side of the universe when we keep on returning to Tatooine, or we keep on returning to the same planets that we've been to. I swear, I get it. It's easy to film on a desert planet, but we keep on returning to the same locations. And so when we do that, then it makes me hard to accept when these people don't know the Skywalkers, or they don't know Mandalorians, or they don't know the Jedi in general. If you want to put this in some distant galaxy that was still affected by the Empire, but maybe the rebels just didn't operate on that side of the universe or something, sure, then it makes sense. But I just feel like sometimes they pick locations like, oh, remember that bar? Oh, remember this scene from this movie? And, wink, wink. But then it kind of doesn't help with the plot and the backdrop that they're trying to set.
One of the things I feel like this series does incredibly well is the way that it structures itself to where it feels almost like you have one intensive story that's going on in episodes 1 through 3, and then you have 7 and 8, and then you have like this like middle trilogy of episodes that is allowing you to explore other reaches of the galaxy, to where you're returning to Tatooine to see Mando kind of become a mentor of sorts to go up against Fennec Shard, who is ironically played by one of the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. actresses, Ming-Na Wen. So I loved kind of the exploration of that, but I loved how by the time you get to the 7th and the 8th episode, you're still pulling from episodes 4, 5, and 6, even though they feel largely disjointed from the larger narrative. They're still bringing all of them in. I feel like they did a really good job at structuring and kind of expanding the story, because there are times where I feel like you're not really given a whole lot of stuff to kind of really cling on to, because we meet Gina Gargo. I don't know how to pronounce her name. But you meet her in episode 4. Gina Carano. You meet her in episode 4, and as much of an impact that she makes, like, she just kind of like is like a one and done kind of character, it feels like. Same with Nick Nolte's Krull, and then the Taka Waititi character, IG Robot, and a lot of these characters, they just feel like one-offs, and then by the time you get to episodes 7 and 8, they bring everything back, and they just restore your faith in that these one-off characters have much larger stories to be told and are bigger to the narrative than we originally thought.
Yeah. So I liked that, but I didn't like it at the same time. So I liked when they brought in Gina Carano. I really like her a lot. I think she's got a lot of talent. I haven't liked everything she's done, but I just like her. She's just got that charm about her, and I like her story in real life about just, all the places she's been and things she's done. So when they brought her in, I really didn't care for episode 4. I thought it's been done so many times. It's the Three Amigos, the Magnificent Seven, the Seven Samurai story. It's been done so many times, and it's been done so many times in Star Wars. Like every Star Wars series or show has a Magnificent Seven episode, and it didn't help that I was catching up on Clone Wars and had just watched the Clone Wars Magnificent Seven episode like recently at the same time. So I was like, they're doing this. I knew from the first scene, I was like, this is going to be a Magnificent Seven episode, and it was. And then it was done, and I was like, oh, I wished I would have seen more of Gina than just that. And so to see her be brought back, I was like, yes, I really liked it. And same with Nick Nolte. I was like, man, that was kind of an interesting character. While I don't want him to be in the show completely, I don't want it to be, the Mandalorian Nick Nolte. I would like to see more of him. So to see him get brought back, I really did like that. So I agree. I liked when they brought the characters back. I didn't like when it was like when he returned back to the same planet. So not only was I like, oh my gosh, they're using the same planets from the movies. They're not really branching out a lot. But then like later in the season, he's going back to the same planets he was in the beginning of the season. And I was like, okay, I guess they just really want to use the same backdrops or something. But it was fine. I liked seeing those characters get brought back. I like seeing that Gina's going to be part of the second season. They felt again, they felt like they were building on something, and they had those episodes in the middle to kind of space that out. We got to see Bill Burr and his crew. I mean, that was a highlight for me. We got to see a little bit more of those kind of side missions and then get brought back to the main story, and the characters that we had learned to appreciate in the beginning were brought back for the end. So yeah, I agree. I really like that.
So episode 2 was my least favorite episode, the one where you have such a solid first episode in The Mandalorian, and then you go to the Child, which is chapter 2, and it's just a filler episode where it's basically Mando gets his ship stripped for parts and basically has to negotiate with the minions of the Star Wars universe and the Jawas to get him back, and then he's like facing off against this giant unicorn, and it's such a filler episode. But for me, I felt like by the time that I got to explore the Gina Carano character, I really just enjoyed her. I even though that episode in particular, like, I feel like they did a lot of Baby Yoda highlights. But I mean, I kind of agree with you. I think that the story, as far as that is kind of concerned, it's not really the best episode of the series, especially the fact that being such a big Planet of the Apes fans, the space pirates all look like Planet of the Apes. Yeah. Like I couldn't make that distinction. I was just like, I was transported back to 1967 watching Charlton Heston in space gear. But by the time that you bring her back, like, I've only ever seen her in a handful of stuff. I've seen her obviously in Deadpool. I've seen her in the Fast and Furious movies. But this is the first time that I feel like she was properly utilized, because I feel like in those other properties, like, she's never really been utilized. So to me, she's never been someone that I will hear her name attached to a project and get really excited. But the fact of what they were able to do with her in The Mandalorian, they really emphasized that charm, that background that she has she was a wrestler at one point, right?
Yeah.
So like they really emphasized like the her background in wrestling and kind of fighting, and I just feel like they did a really good job with her character, and I'm really excited about seeing her come back in this one. And Nick Nolte, I feel like for as little as he's in the show, it's crazy to me to think that he had the catchphrase "I have spoken," and people still quote it. He's in this for like maybe a grand total of like an hour of this entire series, and "I have spoken" is one of the most quotable lines from this. And I have to say, like, he also has one of the most tragic deaths in this entire thing. I've forgotten that he died, and upon my rewatch to prepare for this episode, I almost like started tearing up because it's just the way that it's framed, the way that the music hits in just the right way, and it's like the best way for you to really kind of just have a great emotional cliffhanger to draw you in for the finale.
Yeah, and I misspoke. Gina Carano was not a wrestler; she was an MMA fighter. So she had the muscles and she had the moves way before she started acting, and then she started acting, and I remember her being in smaller roles like in Deadpool and in Fast and Furious, and not that. Then she got her own movie with Haywire that just wasn't that good. But I like her in this show because she's got just enough of a backstory, and she's given some time to breathe, and she's got that charm on screen. She's more than just the girl with muscles, you know, and I wanted more for her in that, and she did really shine in her role as Cara Dune, and so I really liked her, and Nick Nolte was just so great that I recognized his voice, but I didn't know who he was at first, and I'm just like, I don't know who this is, but they're fantastic. I love this character. Like you, I wasn't a huge fan of the episode, but he was the highlight. Like he was like the Yoda character to Luke going to see Yoda in Empire Strikes Back. I liked him, and he brought some character to the episode, and then like you said, he had one of the most tragic deaths towards the end. If watching the second episode, I would not have guessed that by the end of the show, I would feel bad for this dude dying, you know, and it would be impactful to the series. So they did well with that. So those were two really good side characters in an 8-episode show that they did an impressive job with, for sure.
I feel like with the Creel character in particular, they did a really good job at making him, giving him enough to where he was likable, but even more than that, he feels, outside of Baby Yoda, he feels like the most pure that we've seen in this series, because he's just a guy that basically wants to enjoy his retirement. I mean, he was an indentured servant in his former years, and you know, there are several times where Mando's like, I'd like to hire your services, and he's like, my days of that, they're over. And he's pretty stuck in his ways about that, and I love how just wise, and I think that you comparing him to Yoda is a very beautiful depiction, because he just feels just that pure energy of just wisdom, and by the time that you get to his death, it is just one of the most tragic that I feel like this character could have done. And I was in the same boat. Like, I never would have, gone through really liked him in the first episode. Second episode, he was all right. And I never would have imagined by the time you reintroduce him into the 7th episode that I would have been near tears for a character that I've maybe only spent an hour of my life with. And so I think that they did a really great job with that. And in my notes, as I was rewatching the series, I actually put that Gina Carano actually sticks the superhero landing for this show.
That's right.
I loved her so much in this show, and I'm so glad that she got to come back for the second season. I think that when we reintroduce her and she's in that bar actually wrestling that one almost like toad looking guy, like one of the best scenes for her character in this entire series.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, she was fighting not Darth Maul himself, but a race, Darth Maul's race. She was fighting that dude in the ring. I was like, yes, get back to Gina's fighting roots. So yeah, I like that. Nick Nolte's cool, or however you say his name. How do you say his name? Cool?
I always pronounce it as Creel, because that's how he pronounces it as he's like, as Mando's like screaming into the comp, he's always like Creel.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense that Mando wanted to hire him because he literally built his ship overnight. Like, I mean, the ship was like falling apart in scraps, and the dude rebuilt his ship overnight. So I understand, especially with every time we see the Mandalorian out flying around, his ship is just taking a beating. So I get why he would hire him, but I'm glad he didn't take the offer, because then he would have just been the mechanic of the show, you know. And when he comes back in the end, it's not. Oh, you know, I'll go down and fix your ship. You know, it was for more. He came back because he knew that there was a cause that was worthy of his action, and then he you know, stuck by that cause till his death, and so I really like that. And I thought that was a good thing for his character. But I'm glad that they all didn't die. I'm glad this wasn't a Rogue One story where all the side characters died. Not even Bill Burr's team. You know, that episode could have ended with the Mandalorian just killing everybody. But he didn't kill everybody. And I don't know if, you know, I think the rebels were coming in towards the end. Some of them died, some of them didn't. So I wonder if we'll see any of those come back. But the one thing one of the things I didn't care about that episode and some of the other episodes where the Mandalorian runs into somebody he knows, everybody that the Mandalorian runs into that he has a past life with, they're like, "Oh, you're a badass. You know, you used to be a badass. You are, you know, don't mess with this dude. He's you know, he is legit. He's a fighter. He's a killer. Don't mess with him." But yet every time we see the Mandalorian, he's getting his ass kicked. Like this, they might have called this "The Mandalorian Gets His Ass Kicked" season 1. Like, if this was a story about the Mandalorian starting off, I would understand it. But we're not told that this is his first years. We're told that he is a seasoned mercenary people know him, a history of being a badass, a history of being a killer, and a reputation of being someone you don't mess with. But he gets his ass kicked so much to the point where, you know, half the season in, I'm just like, at what point is he going to be this badass that everybody calls him to be? And sometimes he has good moments. And of course, you know, when he's like in the middle of a town center and the entire town is coming after him, I don't expect him to just like straight up kill everybody. But there are other times where he's one-on-one with people that I'm just like, is he really the badass that everybody says he is, or not, you know?
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today. I'm all on the fence with you. Like, so I semi-agree and I semi-disagree. I think that he does have his moments where you're
being able to kind of see these quote unquote legends of Mando come to fruition. There's a scene in chapter 6, the episode where he's like facing off against the robot guards. I feel like once they're in the prison that he did really well. There's a few episodes where he's like facing off against stormtroopers in chapter 3 where the stormtrooper turns to him. He's like, hey, there's like 4 against 1. He's like, oh, I like those odds. And even, Carl Weathers talking about him in the very first episode, I believe, where he talks with, he's an expensive bounty hunter, but yet he's worth every cent. And we kind of get to see that with the Emperor later on, who's played by Warren Herzog, I think.
Herzog. Mm-hmm.
And so you do kind of see that, but I feel like at the same time, I think you're right. Like we do kind of see that, he's not as quick as he would like to be, or as that we're as led to believe. And that's kind of where some of the series really starts to fault itself. It's because, you built up this character and yet you don't really have the capacity to really back up these stories visually speaking.
Which is, I think I would have been fine with him being young in his creed and in his work as a mercenary. Like, I don't want to see day one where he's just a goofball and a klutz and stumbling all around. But I think a lot of this show would have made more sense if people recognized him to still be young in his career and not be like Boba Fett level. Because I feel like if this was a Boba Fett show, half of his mess ups and half of his ass kicking wouldn't happen, because you just like Boba Fett would never just be that weak, or he would never put himself in that situation. So he's not pathetic, and he does, get himself out of most situations. But I feel like Boba Fett is definitely the more seasoned character. And if we do get Boba Fett in season 2, like everyone's theorizing, I would like to see that stark contrast. I would like to see, like, this is the dude who knows what he's doing, and he's that much more trained and that much more solid than the Mando in this show. But at the same time, I was dogging on him, but he's not pathetic. He does hold his own at certain points where you're just like, all right, I like this guy, and I could have done without his whole creed saving him, having to save him. In what was that? Was that episode 3 when they all? So that was a cool scene to see all the Mandos come out and stand up for their brother. But I felt like there was no fallout for that, because in the first couple episodes we see that, the Mandos only come up from underground one at a time. They're very limited. They've been reduced to this living in the freaking sewers, man. And then they come out of, and she's talking about secrecy is the way they survive, and they need to do this. This is the way they have to live in order to survive. Then at the end of the episode, they all come out from underground to help this dude out. Even though he's betraying their creed as a mercenary, he's gone back and he's taken back the child. He's betraying everything that he's been as a mercenary, which is an interesting character arc for him. But then to see all these other mercenaries come out and help him, and then just give up their, in some aspects, maybe their lives, but definitely their livelihood, because they can't just go back to the sewers now. They have to move. They have to leave. I thought there should have been more of an impact to that. Like, instead, we got a cool Rocketeer knockoff moment in the sky, with the, I got to get me one of those things. But the whole time I was like, he just made a choice that, while I'm glad he made the choice and he went back to get the child, I wanted to see the fallout. The Mandos can't just go back underground after that day. They have to leave. They have to uproot their entire lives, and I felt like the show never addressed that.
So a couple things to unpack there. The decision that Mando makes to actually go against his guild and his creed to take the child back shows a level of conscience that turns him from a mercenary into a anti-hero, and it really fits into that Batman archetype because he has this tragic backstory, and now he's going against and he's going rogue, and he's basically becoming a vigilante of sorts. And that, to me, I feel like was an interesting arc, like you had said, but to me, I feel like it's something that it looks like they were just looking at other stories that they could kind of pull from and just be like, okay, we're just gonna change this and that. And that, to me, I feel like kind of cheapens this series just a little bit. Especially, I know that me and you both are huge Batman fans, and we've seen that story done 100 times. But to your point about saying that you wish that the fallout would have been bigger than that, I feel like the fallout is bigger, and I feel like we do get to see it. It's just not in the capacity of screen time. So when they go back to Navarro, all of the stormtroopers' presence is like quadrupled, if not brought into like the infinitieth degree of protection, that this city is now overrun by stormtroopers and ex-Empire, guards and leaders and stuff. And there's a scene where once they go underground, I think it's in the very last episode, they see this shot of just a pile of Mandalorian helmets and armor. And I feel like that's kind of supposed to signify that this was the fallout, like the entire creed that Mando belonged to is no longer living except for the wielder. I feel like she's the only one that really survived the fallout of that, and they just kind of basically relocated to another part of the sewers. That's at least the way that I kind of took it about it. But speaking of stealing things from other properties, can we talk about how this series confirms that there are dragons that live in the Star Wars universe now? Talking about Game of Thrones. Like, I totally forgot that there was a scene with dragons until my rewatch, and I'm like, what? No sense is made here.
Yeah, well, dragons were big for a little bit there, so you gotta throw them in the show. I mean, yeah, who knows? It was probably influenced by Game of Thrones. They definitely brought dragons back to the forefront of modern media. But yeah, you're right. Definitely just kind of threw that in there. Well, you were talking about how when they went back, that display, like the stormtrooper presence was just quadrupled, and then we see other things. We see stormtroopers all over this show for it to be 5 years after Return of the Jedi. That is something that I would have really liked to be addressed, and maybe that can be addressed in season 2. But what the hell, man? If I was a common citizen, I would have been like, oh, cool, rebels. So you blew up the Death Star, and now we have to suffer the consequences? Like, where are the rebels and the Jedi taking care of places like this? When basically the stormtroopers, now that they don't have a hierarchy to report to, they're just thugs. They're just going out there. They're working for evil people. Apparently, they're still making TIE fighters because what's-his-name has his own TIE fighter and he's got his own army. Like, they didn't just die off when you destroyed the second Death Star. There's still plenty of bad guys around. Where are the rebels now? And if they're referring to Jedi as urban myths and sorcerers in the second season, then are the rebels, like, did they really do anything? Did they just blow up a Death Star and then celebrate around a campfire and that was it? Like, just leave the rest of the galaxy to deal with the fallout and the aftermath? Because it seems like there's good people that are still under the foot of bad guys in stormtrooper armor and in Imperial ships and everything, that you don't see the rebels at all. You see people like Gina Carano, who used to be a rebel shock trooper, and she's just hanging out. I mean, is that what they're all doing? I would like to see that more in the second season, whether it's the good people like hating on the rebels for basically making things worse, or what the rebels are doing, because you do see them in this show. You see them in X-Wings, and they got like a prison and everything. Like they exist, but it seems like they're just as obscure as everybody else, and you still have good people, you know, with the Empire's foot on their neck. And it's like, did anything really change after Return of the Jedi, or what?
I think it's interesting. So I look at our own history, and I look at our own society, and when you look at what the Civil War was able to accomplish and the abolishment of slavery, that ideal mentality of people of color still being, as you know, it still says 3/5 of a man. I feel like you still have a lot of those mentalities existing in today's society, even with all of our, you know, civil unrest. That civil unrest is existing because people still carry out that ideology. Yeah. And I feel like that's kind of almost the way that they are handling the fallout of the Death Star destruction the second time around, is that all of those muscles and all of those ideals had to basically be redispersed. And even to pull from another source, like in the Bible, there is the book of Acts has this, like, the first church, and once persecution hit, that church, that big body, basically scattered into a couple dozen smaller variations of the church. And I think it's kind of that same ideology where you have this like ginormous force of Imperials, and then, you know, you have the Death Star hitting, and now everyone's kind of scattered. They're basically the equivalent of hired, just hired like muscle, basically. And I want to say there's an episode of Batman the Animated Series, but I could be wrong, where you're following this hired goon who's basically going from one supervillain's henchman to another's. And I think it's kind of, that's the idea that we're led to believe has basically been happening with the Empire. Like, the Empire is like physically dead, but the ideals and the mentalities and philosophies are still very much alive.
Well, and I mean, those analogies are very accurate. And I understand that. Maybe that's just my issue with the modern Star Wars in general, because, I mean, I get it. You know, we missed multiple decades of filming sequel trilogies with the original crew, over all these years. And so we can't really go tell those stories without doing some type of weird CGI or recasting. But when we jumped from Return of the Jedi to episode, 7, and we see that the rebels are still in this pathetic state, and then we see a show like this, which is supposed to be 5 years after Return of the Jedi, and if you didn't say certain things, you could easily believe that this wasn't after they destroyed the second Death Star. This could have been any time during the original trilogy, with how much you see stormtroopers and all that. I feel like, in general, modern Star Wars tales, if anything, they just downplay the significance of Return of the Jedi. I remember when I saw Return of the Jedi and they blew up the second Death Star and they killed Darth Vader and they killed the Emperor. I'm like, they won. You know, like, this is it. This is the celebration. And it seems like everything we've gotten since then, you know, and it's basically been over the last 15 years, everything we've gotten since then has just showed that they didn't win. There's nothing. I don't know if after that bonfire celebration, that was the last time they celebrated, because it seems like everything else is still really terrible and really shitty. And I guess I would feel like I would be a little refreshed to see some commentary from the average man on how the rebels, you know, like, cool, they had their little victory, but it didn't really do anything for the rest of the universe. I would like to see that commentary be brought out a bit, from the average man, not the person that, you know, is going to be a Jedi in 5 seconds. You know, I'd like to see that from the average man of, you know, yeah, we don't like stormtroopers, but the rebels really didn't do anything for us either.
And I think, too, that a large portion of what they're trying to do with whether it's Rogue One or Solo or The Mandalorian, is to really get away from the Skywalker saga. But I feel like there has to be a balance to where you can't just outright ignore it. Like, you have to very much acknowledge it because of how much of an impact it has on this franchise. I mean, you are now sitting on what, 3 or 4 series, multiple books, multiple comic books, multiple video games, multiple dramatizations that exist in other mediums. You have over almost a dozen films, and 75, if not 80 to 85% of your source material revolves around the Skywalker saga. And so to outright ignore it feels like a crime against this series. And I feel like they didn't necessarily have to acknowledge the Skywalker saga in this one, but they should have acknowledged it more than what we're led to believe, because they tried really hard to just get you to focus on the Mandalorian and the singular character and his mission to basically become this like surrogate father to the child. And that, to me, I feel like is interesting in and of itself, but to some degree, especially when the first trailer came out, and one of the first images in that trailer is stormtroopers' helmets on pikes. I mean, it is one of the best, very brief shots that we get in the series, but you are kind of led to believe that that's what we're going to get throughout the entire series. And the original trilogy feels like an afterthought compared to a lot of the other stuff that happens throughout the series. And there's still a lot of mystery that's wrapped in the series. And I feel like, to me, that's the marks of good storytelling, because in our most recent episode on Nightmare on Elm Street, Dan had pointed out to us, you know, we're 10 years removed from Christopher Nolan's Inception, and yet we're still talking about that ending. That's the hallmarks of great media. And I feel like a lot of the questions and and unanswered questions too that you get with this first season, like where does the child come from? How, you know, is he really 50? What does the Force look like now after, you know, you're removing of Darth Vader and the Empire and the Skywalkers? Like what does that really look like? And then kind of getting to explore more of those things. I feel like being ambiguous about that makes this series a bit more better. But I feel like you're gonna have those, and Star Wars post Disney has been just controversial altogether. So I think you're going to have fans that are going to be in my camp that are going to be like, this is okay that these questions aren't answered and that they're not acknowledging these movies as much as I want them to. And then you're going to have people in your camp where it's like, I wanted more from the series that the series didn't give me. It left me more questions than it did answers.
Yeah, and I get it. This was the first season. This was a lot of build-up. This was a lot of, you know, get you used to this main character. So that's what I'm hoping for in season 2. I'm hoping for some expansion. I'm hoping for some answers. I'm hoping for a little bit more about the child, a little bit more about the you know, where the galaxy is with the rumors of Ahsoka being on season 2. That leads me to believe that Dave Filoni is going to be more involved, because that is Dave Filoni's baby. You know, he created Ahsoka in Rebels, or not in Rebels, in Clone Wars, brought her back in Rebels, didn't make Rebels the Ahsoka show, but definitely like continued her story arc. And so that's what I'm hoping we get a little bit more. I don't want The Mandalorian to be the Ahsoka show, but I don't want her appearance in that to be throwaway either. I want it to be a continuation of her story. I've heard some drama, like Grace Randolph seems to suggest that she knows a lot of drama went down in the filming for the second season, to the point where there's a rumor out there that the Mandalorian isn't even in the second half of the show, which I'm worried about. But I do want to see more. I do want to see some more expansion of the characters and of the story in season 2, and I'm pretty sure we'll get that. But it definitely, this first season, I know I've been nitpicking. It didn't leave a sour taste in my mouth. It was really entertaining, and it was refreshing, and it was nice to see something else. But at the same time, what you're talking about all these shows and everything being around the Skywalker saga, it gives me a lot of excitement and a lot of fear around the old Knights stuff that Star Wars is now doing, because they're talking about doing, I don't know if it was a series or a series of movies about the Knights of the Old Republic. And, I can't imagine a Star Wars property without stormtroopers or without, the iconic Empire imagery that we've all grown up with. And that'll be centuries before stormtroopers and all that stuff. So what will that even look like? Because right now you can't imagine a Star Wars story without a stormtrooper. And even though we get duped so many times, one of the coolest clips of the second season trailer for Mandalorian are those stormtroopers taking those speed bikes over the cliff and everything. And you're just like, you get me every time, Star Wars. You show me this cool imagery of stormtroopers, and I forget how pathetic they are. But they look so cool because they're in the stormtrooper armor. But yeah, I can only imagine what the Knights of the Old Republic is going to be like.
Yeah, I'm curious about that, kind of moving forward. And we're a couple weeks now away from the second season, but I think before we kind of start jumping into predictions for the second season, it's worth noting really the character design of this show, the production design, as well as also the fight choreography. I mean, I feel like these are kind of like unsung heroes of the Star Wars franchise. But to me, I feel like watching it, just some of the fight choreographies that they were able to really manifest throughout the course of this, I feel like they did a fantastic job. And it was just utterly incredible. And the score by, I'm going to butcher the guy's name, but Ludwig G. I'm just going to call him the guy that did Tenet, did a phenomenal job. And just kind of watching him do some behind the scenes of like how he created the score and that like iconic I feel like just really was it's incredible. And those are some of the highest hallmarks of this series outside of just the character development and the overall narrative.
Yeah, I agree, and it's kind of become a more of a thing now. Whereas back in the day when you got a DVD, not only were you excited to own the movie that you really liked, but you were excited for all the special features that you got with that DVD, right? So the streaming services nowadays are starting to put out their own versions of those special features with these behind-the-scenes documentaries of how they made things. And to Disney's credit, especially this year where they're hurting for content and all of their content they had planned keeps getting pushed back, when they released that short series of behind-the-scenes of the making of The Mandalorian, I really appreciated that. I thought that was really cool to see, especially when they were talking about the digital backgrounds that they used for filming this. They had Unreal Engine 4, which is the game engine that Epic Games created. They used that technology to make this immersive digital backdrop to film a lot of this stuff. And, like half of it was stuff that they filmed in camera that was then rendered through that Unreal Engine on that backdrop. And then half of it was stuff that ILM created, with their special effects team. So that was really cool to see. I think there were some great backdrops in this show, and I mean, I'm sure I could find something But when you're watching a modern day movie and the background CGI like flops and you're just like, oh, it's so bad, like I can't unsee that. They did really well with the sets for this, and a lot of it was desert stuff and stuff like that, but it still looked really good. And so the set design, just seeing the technology that they used to really bring out everything in the show, it was very impressive. And I'm sure Favreau was behind a lot of that, especially the stuff that he did with the Jungle Book. He's got a lot of skill and of experience under his belt with these other properties that he's done for Disney, like Iron Man and the Jungle Book and whatnot. So he was definitely the good creative mind to get behind this, and I think it really showed.
I completely agree. And one of the last things I feel like we probably should talk about would be the child, which really helped really kind of spawn the series into a brand new life. And I feel like when you're talking with people about this series in particular, we are so fixated on how cute Baby Yoda is that you forget about how much of a badass Mando is, one, and two, you kind of also forget about how dark the show can be at times. And just it's crazy to me that Favreau was able to convince Disney to not do any toys for this so that it would be a real twist when you got to the end of chapter 1 and here was this child that was causing all of this chaos. To me, I feel like it's still one of the best twists that this show offers. And even, of course, it is Gizmo for a brand new generation.
Yeah, that is the crazy thing about modern movie making, that people that don't follow movie podcasts or movie things as much as we do, they might not know this, but it's so crazy to imagine that a movie production has to take into account that a foreign country, on the other side of the planet, them making toys could ruin the viewing experience for someone in America. Like a company in South America or in China or something else making a toy, that's a year's worth of production. That could ruin, the story of a show that hasn't come out yet. And yeah, to convince Disney not to do that, and then you're like, well, Disney could have done something. They could have had something in the works. Not really, because there's so much that goes into that. So that you really just had this boom of Etsy creators making their version of Baby Yodas for a couple of months until Disney put a stop to that. But that it was insane. And at the same time, we should have expected it because, Star Wars has a history of bringing in something like this. They had the Ewoks in Return of the Jedi. Doesn't matter how adult or how tense the story is, they needed some type of toy. They needed some type of merchandise that would connect the younger viewers to the intensity on the screen. So we should have expected something along these lines. But yeah, it was a big reveal, and it did huge business for them. I mean, I work at a nonprofit right now, and we're doing a charity auction next month, and my local comic book store put together a charity auction gift basket of just Baby Yoda stuff. And it's just, they've got the huge plush, they got the little pop figures, they got everything. And people are already like, oh my gosh, Baby Yoda. It took everything by storm, Baby Yoda. And then it just looked so good on screen, especially with all the flops that all the issues they had with the younger Yoda in the prequels. This looked really, really good. And I agree. There are some people that were like, well, we came to this show wanting the Mandalorian, not wanting the Mandalorian being the babysitter for this cute little alien. Some people thought that it detracted from the story, and I agree. But at the same time, it gave purpose to the story. It was kind of like a handicap to a badass character. Like, how is he going to be a badass and also take care of this little cute thing at the same time? It was like a handicap that I thought was interesting story-wise.
I wouldn't necessarily see that it is a handicap, but also a newer challenge to take this character in. And you're absolutely right. I think that this blew the lid off of what the series was able and capable of doing. I know that, like, I love cats, and they melt my heart. And there were times where I would watch this with my wife, and Yoda would do something, and I would just be like warming up and like being like all fuzzy inside. And my sister, who's not even a Star Wars fan at all. Actually, she got married this past July, and actually their quote unquote ring bearer was a plush Baby Yoda. And so this really allowed the franchise to step into new territories in the way that I feel like you wouldn't have necessarily been able to, because of course you're going to appease the Star Wars fans that are diehards. You're going to please the casual fans, but you're reintroducing this into a brand new generation. I think you're absolutely right. This series does a phenomenal job of just being able to really, capture just visually speaking a adorable, like, just absolutely breathtakingly awesome creature. I think the visual effects on this are just incredible. But I feel like similarly to like Jason Momoa becoming Aquaman, you're introducing this character to a brand new generation that necessarily may have not been Star Wars fans to begin with. I think that that's a beautiful strike of creative gold that Favreau and Disney were able to capture with this one.
Absolutely. And from a marketing and executive standpoint, they had to have been over the moon with this, because Baby Yoda is not their term. That is a fan term that struck the world on fire. I mean, if you look at all of the marketing for this, all of the toys that have come out even now, they're not called Baby Yoda toys. They're called the child toys. In no part of the series or in any official marketing has this child been referred to as Baby Yoda. That is something that is a nickname that the fans created that then the media started putting out. And anytime you get a nickname from the fan base that one sticks and two is positive, it's not a negative nickname. It's not a joke that you wish you could get rid of, but you can't. This was a positive nickname that people, like you said, that probably weren't. There's a lot of people that don't know anything about Star Wars, but they know what Baby Yoda is. And they probably incorrectly know what Baby Yoda is, because they might actually think that this is Baby Yoda and not just, whatever it is. I don't think anybody really thinks that it's Yoda. But the fact that people call it Baby Yoda, because this is the only other time we've seen something in that species, other than maybe there was a second Yoda character in one of the prequel movies. But that was gold to the marketing and to the executives, that it took off like that. That Baby Yoda became a household name, despite them not planning that. I mean, that's crazy. It did for this show. And that is, you're talking about predictions for a second season. I really want to get into more of that. I want to know more about who is this, why does the Empire know about it, and why do they want it so bad, and where does it go from here?
Absolutely agreed. And I think that is going to kind of do it for us throughout the course of kind of breaking things down. But we're going to have a quick mental health moment. And I feel like the mental health moment is the strength and the growth of the Mandalorian as a character, where you find out that is at the beginning of the series, here you have this very isolated character that thrives on just being alone and solidarity, and then introducing and basically becoming a surrogate father to the child. You're seeing him grow in unexpected ways, and I feel like sometimes that is really what we have to do when it comes to overcoming depression or the desire for suicidal or drinking or doing drugs for the wrong reasons and just stuff along those lines. And I just want to encourage anyone right now that if you are listening to this, that sometimes growth becomes growth beats solidarity, and you really have to take into account that your mental health is not going to be depression is not going to overcome your mental health alone. You need community, and you need to surround yourself with. And I think that when Mando accepts Carl Weathers' invitation to come back, he's like, I will come back under one circumstance, that I get to basically bring my own community. And I think that that shows a lot of growth for him as a character. And I just want to encourage anyone listening that community can help you and really impact your mental health as far as overcoming depression.
Yeah, I would agree. And talking about solidarity, especially in this year, I know a lot of people have been struggling with that. I know a lot of people who back in March, when they were faced with working from home, kind of looked forward to it, kind of looked forward to the time that they were going to spend reconnecting with themselves. They couldn't go to work. They couldn't go out partying. They couldn't always be surrounded by people. They had to go home. And a lot of people look at that and saying, this is going to be relaxing. This is going to be great. I can reconnect with myself. I can take some time off. But then as the months went by, then they started missing people, and that solidarity became the villain in their lives, and they missed being around people, and it became more of another reason for them to be depressed, and it became a burden than something for them to look forward to. And so, I understand the allure of being by yourself and cutting yourself off from the world. But especially in these times, I would say if you can, do it safely, whether or not it's in person or over Zoom. Reach out to your friends. A text here and there is not enough. I think seeing them in person or seeing them over Zoom, some safe way of reconnecting with your friends has been a big part of keeping my sanity and keeping my strength mentally and emotionally. And, just know that there's always somebody out there for you. And it can be a big relief just to have a conversation, even if you don't have a plan, even if you don't have an agenda for that conversation. Reconnect with the people who love you and who care about you, and that can go a long way.
Agreed. And we want to encourage anyone that's listening to this right now that if you are struggling, to go into our links right now in the description, wherever you guys are currently finding that. You guys will find links to just get connected with counselors, churches, the suicide hotline, and much more. It's victimsandvillains.net/hope. This is the reason we make this content. And please just stay with us. If you guys need community, feel free to follow us on any of our social media. We're really interactive over there. And speaking of social media, where can people find you online, Josh?
They can find me on Facebook. They can find me my website, www.fierceliterature or fiercelit.com, and any of my other social media. So I'm on Instagram. I'm out there. I don't really remember all my tags. Just go to the website, fiercelit or fierceliterature.com. You'll find my books and my comics and my hopeful plans for 2021 with Comic-Cons coming back. Man, I'm glad I can see you this weekend, man, because normally I'd be at New York Comic-Con this weekend. This was the original plan. Maybe we would have connected again at New York Comic-Con, and man, I am missing people this weekend, so it has been a pleasure seeing you for sure.
Yeah, same. New York Comic-Con's always been one of my favorite conventions to cover, and just to get to be able to just be around that energy, and it's unmatched. I feel like it's the closest to San Diego that either one of us have ever been as far as conventions go, but it's great to see you. It's great recording with you. You guys can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and Letterboxd, or go to victimsandvillains.net where you guys can find that, suicide prevention resources, more episodes, and much more. And until next time, remember to keep talking nerd, talking hope, speaking nothing else, and remember, this is the way.